In Matthew's story, there are no shepherds. The wise men alone come to see the baby Jesus. And Jesus is not an infant. Jesus is a young boy of 2. There's no stable in Matthew's account. Baby Jesus here, it keeps falling down. But rather a house. In Luke's story, we have no wise men. There is a manger, an infant child, and instead of kings, the first to worship are the shepherds. So how is it that we have 2 distinct stories? What does each tell us about the baby Jesus, this life of Christ begun in Bethlehem? Why do Matthew and Luke tell so different stories? We got to back up a little bit and first ask the question, why do they tell the stories of Jesus' birth at all? In fact, in all of the New Testament, it seems that only Matthew and Luke are concerned about Jesus' origin story. If Jesus was a superhero, we would want to know where he came from. But the early Christians weren't so concerned. They were more concerned with the life that Jesus lived, his death, and his resurrection. But Matthew and Luke, they're writing a generation later. Both of these gospel writers discover that in the story of Jesus' birth, we find a prelude to the whole gospel, a summary, a beautiful introduction to what we're going to encounter. Why do Matthew and Luke tell the story? They tell the story of Jesus' birth because they are concerned with the identity right from the start. Jesus is both Son of God and Son of David. Jesus has a tradition and a history that opens into a new future for God and God's people. The idea of God being in some high heaven is ancient. It goes even, in fact, before the Jewish traditions and the Torah. God is high in the heavens. In Matthew and Luke, they tell the story of the incarnation, of God coming to earth in a place, Bethlehem. And there, God taking on human form, living as not only the Son of God, but also the Son of David. This incarnation is critical it is an important part of our story. For God's story enters into our story. God's story enters our story. Different characters, different settings. Jesus' age in both are different. Both Matthew and Luke are writing to two distinct communities. Matthew's community, most likely, was a Jewish Christian community in the city of Antioch. Matthew is concerned with connecting this story to the whole story of salvation, reaching back way into the Old Testament. We'll take a look at that next week, why the genealogy of Jesus is an important part of his story, part of the gospel, the good news. Luke is concerned with more of interacting with the Roman world, the economic and the wealth of the world. And so he is going to be concerned with issues of poverty. Today I want you to think of the question, so what difference does it make? What difference does this story of Jesus' birth make for you in your life? To know that God has entered into our struggle and our time. What difference does it make in our world that God is present? Think about that. Next week, we will be talking about the origin stories found in Matthew's Gospel. We're going to look into the genealogy. I guarantee you, it's going to be more fun than it sounds. And then we'll look at Matthew's telling of the shepherds, of the kings coming to baby Jesus, who is really a 2-year-old. Then in the following weeks, we'll get to Luke and we'll give him his turn as well. Thank you for joining me on this journey. I love to tell the story, and I know you do as well.